So thank you everyone for joining us. This is Brene Lloyd from Northwatch, and this is the second in our 2020 webinar series, Nuclear Waste Online. And the presentation today is very much an overview presentation, an update on the four waste management projects that are being brought forward by atomic energy, by Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. And I'm going to mute all participants now. So there are four now major projects, major Canadian Nuclear Laboratories waste projects that we're going to look at today. CNL manages nuclear liabilities for the federal government through a contract with Atomic Energy Canada Limited. So there are other sites under their supposed watch, but we're going to look at the four projects today that are moving forward.
Renee, your voice is going in and out.
Okay.
It just started doing that. You weren't earlier, and it was just when you started this last few sentences.
All right, let's try that again then. So
Okay,
the four sites are Chalk River, Rolphton, Whiteshell, and now Douglas Point. So we'll look at the three environmental assessments for the Chalk River, Rolphton, and Pinawa, and then it's a licensing amendment for Douglas Point. And you can see that for these environmental assessments, the timelines have been greatly extended. The projects, the draft A, the project started in 2016, draft A in 2017, and on all of them, we're still waiting for a final environmental impact statement to be released. So first, a word about the proponent. Well, if you want to speak to these next couple of slides.
Sure, Brene, I'd be happy to. Well, there's a nice picture of Chalk River. Let's go to the next slide if we, with all the red. There's another nice picture. Okay, this one. Just prior to the 2015, can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just prior to the 2015 fall federal election, the previous conservative government signed a 6-year contract, which is renewable for two-year terms until 2025, with a multinational consortium of 5 companies, 2 UK, 2 US, 1 Canadian. And it calls itself the Canadian National Energy Alliance. It was incorporated in 2015. The 2 UK companies, Rolls-Royce, are gone. Rolls-Royce dropped out. Atkins was bought by SNC-Lavalin. 2 US engineering firms remain, called Jacobs and Fluor, both Texas-based. And both of them have paid tens of millions of dollars under non-prosecution agreements, which are similar to deferred prosecution agreements, to settle charges of false claims, kickbacks, bribery, and importantly, workplace health and safety violations. And the only Canadian member of the consortium is SNC-Lavalin. Under the deal negotiated by the Harper government, these 3 companies own all the shares in Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, which was started in 2014 as a subsidiary of ACL, and they have control of all federal nuclear facilities. But the ownership of the facilities and the ownership of the waste remains with AECL, hence with the government and with the taxpayers. And the contract that was signed between ACL and CNEA includes 3 sub-agreements, and this is something from maybe the most important, the Site Operating Company sub-agreement, which calls for greatly accelerated decommissioning and disposal of all waste. Next slide. Funding has been majorly ramped up for nuclear decommissioning, and this comes from main estimates from the taxpayers of Canada. You can see it averaged before the GOCO thing came just over 100 million, and now it's well over 500 million. And in the current budget that was just released last Thursday, the amount of tax dollars for decommissioning waste management is 848 million. It's really, really gone up. So they're really shoveling out the cash for this. Next. This is let's move on to the next one. This is the process that we're in. With the first draft environmental assessment or environmental impact statement was released in March 2017, but we just got a revised draft environmental impact statement. But in December of last year, I guess we're kind of guessing when the final, and this is just a revised one, we're guessing that the final one, there'll be a push on to get it out. I don't think spring, I think fall of 2020, and maybe a hearing late this winter sometime. Next. Renee, you kindly threw in some of the scary slides of the strontium-90 and tritium plumes that are already moving in from some of the old waste management areas into the wetlands and into Perch Lake and Perch Creek. The site of the proposed near-surface disposal facility is where the legend would be, just to the right of all the purple and yellow in Waste Management Area A. So let's now talk about the NSDF is a proposed giant above ground mound, 5 to 7 stories high, size of 70 NHL hockey rinks, over 1 million tons of radioactive waste on a hillside, adjacent to wetlands, on the Chalk River Labs property, 1 kilometer from the Ottawa River. Waste would include debris from demolishing over 100 old buildings on the Chalk River and Whiteshell Lab sites. So that's contaminated metal, wood, concrete, asbestos, and from 10 to 15% what they call packaged wastes, which would range in size from drums and barrels to, next slide, Sealand containers to be driven directly into the facility, and you unhook the trailer and you leave it there. And then you cover all that with radioactively contaminated soil, of which there's some 350,000 cubic meters at Chalk River as a result of 70 years of federal research and development, which included a lot of activities such as making plutonium for the U.S. nuclear weapons program. So there's a complex, problematic, and poorly documented mixture of radioactive and other hazardous waste. This is you probably can't see all the numbers, but this is the mix of radionuclides that was in the original EIS. And many of them have very long half-lives. Next, please. So this supposed near-surface disposal facility is actually more similar to an above-ground landfill, or what they call an engineered containment mound. And this would be one of Canada's first ever permanent radioactive disposal sites for nuclear reactor waste. It would be the first, along with Rolphton and Whiteshell, which Brené's going to talk about. This shows all the various federal nuclear sites that have already been shipping waste to Chalk River, which is the consortium, this Canadian National Energy Alliance with Jacob and Flora and Atkins, has been sort of secretly shipping a lot of waste to Chalk River and turning it into Canada's de facto national waste repository. So, yeah, I was going to say the Whiteshell has waste. They've accelerated Whiteshell decommissioning about 3,000 tons of Whiteshell waste to Chalk River, but in smaller amounts from Douglas Point, Gentil, and a little bit from Port Hope has been shipped up in recent months. Next. Yeah, right on the Ottawa River, upstream from Ottawa. Next. There's really only one site under consideration. It's the one on the right, the so-called East Mattawa Road EMR site, which is about a kilometer from the river. Next. Being that close, after the closure of the mound, it would be in use for 50 years. Waste would leak into the river, well, literally for millions of years, because there would be a lot of uranium in the waste, and also things like lead and arsenic and mercury that don't have a half-life. A lot of non-radiological hazardous substances would go. Next. Okay, this I'll spend a minute on this because you can see the mound, and just to the left of the mound are some of the old leaking waste sites. After 50 years, the mound would get capped, and there would be a liner on the bottom, so a plastic liner on the bottom, plastic liner on the top. The top liner would protect the waste from rain and snow, to which they would be exposed during dumping. But after dumping, the waste would be protected for, we don't know how long a plastic liner would last, but it won't last anywhere near as long as the waste. So the top liner is likely to degrade faster than the bottom liner, and water will once again permeate the waste in the mound. And because the bottom liner will remain intact, it'll act like a bathtub, and it'll just sort of fill up with water, particularly during snow melt and high water, high precipitation, and simply overflow into Perch Creek. So, and this is straight out of the environmental impact statement. Next, I think we covered this one. Next, and we covered this one. Next, and yeah, I should probably say a little bit about the agreements between Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, this is wholly owned subsidiary by the private corporations, and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. They've this Appendix A document is supposedly has all the timelines, so you know when the final environmental impact statement's supposed to be released, and when the hearing is supposed to take place, and how much time people will have in advance of the hearing to comment on the final EIS and on the environmental assessment report that CNSC is supposed to make. However, the timelines are all gone. This was CNSC decided they would clarify the timing of the environmental assessment process by removing all the timelines. So we don't really know when we're going to see CNSC's environmental assessment report and have supposedly another chance to comment on this. Next. That's it.
Okay, thank you all. That was very, very helpful. So I'm going to try to go at a fairly fast pace through the next couple of projects, and it really is just an overview and an update. So the next project is just up the river from Chalk River, and that's at Rolphton, and it's the Nuclear Power Demonstration Project, which now I see referred to as a nuclear power waste facility. So similar to the near surface disposal facility, the EA started some time ago. A draft EA was released. Many comments have been put in, were submitted, and there's going to be a revised draft EA released at some time. So these predicted dates, fall 2020 and spring 2021, come from a combination of CNSC or CNL, but as Ola noted, they're really not very reliable. In the case of Rolphton, yes?
Can you hear me? Can you, something's happening so we can hardly hear you at all. There's like a feedback or an echo or something. So maybe, I don't know if you can move your mic or somehow stop the feedback.
Let me look at...
My guess is it's because you're recording and this recording button is on.
That doesn't usually affect it. Let me try muting and see if that makes any difference. Any difference?
Yeah, the way you're speaking right now is fine. Yeah.
Any improvement? Okay, so I'm going to crouch forward. If you can see my, if you can see my webcam, you'll see that I'm very up close now. So, I borrowed some slides from Teresa who just spoke from her presentation of a few years ago, because not that much has changed. So the Rolphton project is on the Ottawa River at the small hamlet of Rolphton, which is also the site of a major hydroelectric development. And it, like Chalk River, like the project at Pinawa are right on major river, extremely close proximity. And like the other projects, the river will be the recipient of large amounts of radionuclide contamination coming from the project. So the current status of the site is that the fuel and heavy water have been removed, taken already to Chalk River. CNL provided some estimates of radioactivity levels in their project description and in the draft EIS. And I present them there simply for information. They have moved to a proposal for in situ decommissioning, and in that approach, all radioactive materials will be grouted in place. So in effect, the structures, the above ground structures, will be moved into the below grade structures. It will be filled, and it will be what they call grouting, basically pouring concrete in. So objectives are really similar between Rolphton and Whiteshell. Rapid decommissioning, what they call a rapid reduction of interim and long-term nuclear liabilities, and they will certainly be changing the shape of those liabilities. Reduction of the liabilities is another question. The only disadvantage that the proponent has noted for both Rolphton and Pinawa Whiteshell reactor number 1 is the need for long-term management. According to the draft EIS, the reactor core, the calendria, will be grouted in place, but that's not consistent throughout their documents. I think it was in the project description it was going to be removed to Chalk River. So there's a number of inconsistencies as they move through the documents. And so with Chalk River, we see a challenge is that they release a second draft EIS with no public comment and no resources to do a second review. I anticipate that the same will be the case with Rolphton and Pinawa. So just some of the common failings that Northwatch identified between the project description and the draft EIS, things that did not improve. No clear statement of purpose, really overgeneralized statements, lots of statements about the underground structure being sealed by grouting, but no really adequate descriptions of the grouting, the grout formula, the basis for the selection of that grout formula, lots of leaps of faith kind of statements, non sequiturs, and the documents really provide inadequate information about the site conditions. And so it's really difficult to assess the hazards and their proposals for remediating those hazards. Like the other CNL projects, we're a step behind with Rolphton and White River. There are these administrative protocols. The last public notice simply says that they're going to take more time. So CNL has received all of the comments from the federal government, Indigenous peoples organizations, and the public, and they are going to take more time to review those and revise their draft EIS, environmental impact statement. Whiteshell, very similar to the project at Rolphton, similar kind of a timeline. Similar uncertainty, similar location in that it's immediately adjacent to, in this case, the Winnipeg River. It's on the bank of the Winnipeg River. Similar in that it was started as a research reactor in the 1960s, shut down in the 1980s, and CNL is the operator. Different for Whiteshell is it had previously undergone an environmental assessment as a comprehensive study report, and it had a decommissioning plan and an approval of that plan in place. CNL has brought forward quite a different approach, being in situ decommissioning, basically entombment in place. And there's not really been any rationale provided for why they made that switch. So the new proposal will leave the reactor permanently in place, similar to Rolphton. Contaminated materials above grade will be moved below grade, and then it'll be a fill and flee kind of approach. Just an image of the Whiteshell reactor vessel itself. Current status, the fuel was removed. It's in storage on site. Heavy water was removed and sent to Chalk River. And systems, the in-system requirements such as primary heat transport, all high levels of radioactivity in those parts of the system. But a real issue with the Whiteshell reactor project is that the inventory is decades old, and the inventory appears to rely on modeling, on estimates of the radionuclide present, the radioactivity, and not actually on testing. At least that was the case at the time of the draft EIS.
So true.
So the rationale for changing the EIA is seemingly absent. It outlines the advantages of reducing exposure. Those were all similarly available when they made previous decisions to go with their previous decommissioning approach. So issues relate, of course, to the situation of it being immediately adjacent to the river, no characterization of the radionuclides, no acknowledgement of the history of serious accidents at this reactor, and it's really an unproven approach, this fill, grout, and flee. So it used to be fill and flee, now it's fill, grout, and flee. And it would definitely set a poor precedent, and one that we should be concerned about how it might replicate itself at other reactors. So a summary of our review, and this is shockingly similar to the Rolphton review. It's also no clear statement of purpose, no delineation between activities in the already approved plan and the new approach, overgeneralized, unsubstantiated claims, and non-sequiturs, inadequate information about the site, claims that the in-situ decommissioning will meet project criterion, but doesn't actually support that claim, and then numerous statements about the underground structures and how they'll be sealed, but no adequate information about the grouting. And I just want to note that these are issues that were flagged in the project description, were noted in the review of project description, and yet were unaddressed or unresolved when they came to the draft environmental impact statement. So this is the timeline that White CNL has put forward. This is the larger timeline, not the EA timeline, that they would have an approval already in place, that they would be preparing for the in-situ decommissioning by a year ago, that they would be grouting by next year, and they would be all done and out of there in about 4 years, 5 years from now. So that's clearly not the timeline that they're traveling with now. Very similar to the Rolphton, the nuclear power demonstration project. There was a review of the draft EIS, lots of comments in from the public federal government agencies, including the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, Indigenous Peoples Organization, but no response to those. And the timeline has just gone blank in terms of when CNL will actually respond to those comments, demonstrate their response to those comments, and file a revised environmental impact statement.
Could Renee, this might be a good time for me. Could I say one thing about this?
Definitely.
Okay, that is, at least for these 3 projects, there are a lot of retired AECL officials at Whiteshell that worked at Rolphton, worked at Chalk River, who are all still concerned about these projects and have submitted their own critical comments. Many of them are consultants working for the International Atomic Energy Agency. They go back and forth to Vienna and get well paid to do that. But they have pointed out that none of these 3 projects, the 2 Entombment and the Mound project, is consistent with international guidance from the IAEA. Our group, our Concerned Citizens group, has actually kind of latched on to that idea that Canada is violating IAEA safety standards. The decommissioning safety standard says extremely clearly entombment should only be used in case of emergency, and there's a disposal safety standard that basically says don't put above ground, don't put long-lived waste above ground where they're not isolated from the biosphere. So we have cited all these IAEA documents and said that Canada is ignoring them. Unfortunately, now the president of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, Rumina Velshi, has been appointed as chair of the IAEA Safety Standards Committee. So we don't know if maybe she's going to try to get some of those standards weakened so that things like reactor entombment can be considered acceptable at the international level. So thanks for just letting me say a few things about that.
Great, that's helpful. Thanks, all. So the new kid on the block in terms of CNL projects moving forward at this point is the Douglas Point reactor decommissioning. And this is on the Bruce Nuclear Generating Station, larger property within the municipal boundaries of Kincardine, so at Tiverton. So this is one of the research reactor, it was I think called a prototype reactor. And it came out of thinking around the same time as Rolphton and the early reactors at Chalk River. So it was a project of Atomic Energy of Canada. The idea first came out in the late 1950s and project development through the 1960s. It first went critical in 66, first electricity produced in 67, and it was declared in service in 68, and it operated for 17 years. I don't know if I captured here, but the operating efficiency was 54% overall. It was a small reactor, 200 megawatt reactor and 54% capacity. So there's a couple of places to look for fairly spotty information. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission website has something on now called the Douglas Point Waste Facility, and they've got facility information there, including the application for the license amendment to the decommissioning license, which was filed in July of 2019, although we missed that, not crawling every facility's page every day. We missed that until the notice of the hearing went out a few weeks ago. So another source of limited information is on the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories website, where they have a page about the Douglas Point reactors. So, and saying the next phase of decommissioning is being planned to both reduce and minimize the risk to health, safety, and security to the public. So this is the timeline that CNL has posted for the Douglas Point decommissioning. But I think what's important to note is, so they're moving forward with what they're calling decommissioning, but it really is very much just a partial decommissioning. So the plan, according to the CNL website, is that it remains in storage with surveillance, and the next phase of planning is underway. The next steps are to get a license amendment approved. So that seems to be, in effect, what the objective is to get the license amended. Emphasis is more on getting approvals than it is on actually what they want to achieve with the decommissioning, at least on the CNL very summary pages. They say, where will the waste go? Well, I think the short form is that it'll go to Chalk River. So the low and intermediate level waste, they're planning to move to Chalk River. They say for the used fuel, it will be moved, it will stay on site and then be moved to the Nuclear Waste Management Organization's supposed, proposed, expected, long anticipated geological repository for Canada's irradiated fuel waste. Interesting, in the documents, in the preliminary decommissioning plan, which I've only had a very quick look at, they're actually silent on where the other wastes that house the fuel waste will go, whether that goes to NWMO or it's another set of shipments to Chalk River. These are the documents that are available so far. So the application is available on the CNSC website, link to the CNL website, and they've also made the detailed decommissioning plan now available on the CNL website. On the application, there's 10 references, but there are 4 what they call enclosures, and these are what I would consider to be essential documents in reviewing the proposal. And to date, only one of them has been made available. We have made the request of both the CNSC and the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories for the enclosures and the references, and they're reaching out within their team, they tell us. So this is the overall timeline for the decommissioning activities, and you'll see that there's a block of blue, and that is all of the related infrastructure. So all of the buildings save the reactor unit and the reactor core. And you'll see it's off in a much longer, it's off in the 2035 to 2070 timeframe. So here's the timeline for it. In February, CNSC, February 2019, CNSC approved the splitting out of the decommissioning licenses for Douglas Point, Gentil, and Nuclear Power Demonstration Project. And I think that's where this part of the story began. And then CNL filed their application to amend the decommissioning license. Oh, that February 2019 hearing was a write-in only hearing with submissions accepted only from CNSC staff and the CNL. Then CNL filed an application in 2019, link posted on the website. Notice of hearing came out in February. The CNL and CNSC documents will be available April 2nd. Public comments must be submitted May 4th, and the hearing will be June 17th, 18th, somewhere in the vicinity of the project. Initially, it was saying project location to be determined. Now it's saying location in the community to be determined. So it will be in the Bruce area. So that's our quick summary. We've got 41 seconds left. So I want to thank Sela, Teresa. Lots of the content from the slides. You saw a Sela logo in the bottom. That was borrowed from previous presentations, and thanks also to Ole for his presentation and information. So, discussion. I think I'm going to stop the screen share and see if that might allow me to see the chat box. So I'm also going to stop the recording and see if that might